I feel like I should be wearing a crown for this video, but I don't have a crown. I want a crown. Hello everybody, it's Katie here, and I have finally finished the Folk of the Air series by Holly Black. So I picked up The Cruel Prince during our first lockdown last year, and in the first half of the book, I wasn't really that drawn in. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. But then the second half of the book completely had me hooked. I absolutely adored the ending. I couldn't wait to get my hands on the next book, but then life got kind of crazy, things got in the way, and I never read the rest of the trilogy until this year. So in January, I finally read The Wicked King and The Queen of Nothing, and I loved this trilogy so much more than I expected to. I tend not to like fairy books that much. I don't know why, because I loved fairy when I was a kid, but now as somebody who reads fantasy YA, fairy books are always the ones that I tend not to enjoy as much. So I honestly didn't expect to fall in love with this trilogy, but here we are. So as always, when I finish something I love, I thought I would have a little chit chat about it. So I've never really done a series discussion before. I normally just focus on one book at a time, so you can expect this video to be a complete mess. I will probably forget everything that happened in The Cruel Prince and just focus on the last book, but hey, I'm gonna give it a go. For those of you who haven't read the trilogy, I'm going to do a little spoiler-free section to just give you my overall thoughts, and then I will delve more into the story for those of you who have read the books. So this trilogy follows Jude and his sisters. The three of them grow up in fairy because the older sister Vivi has a fairy for a father, but Jude and her twin sister Taryn are mortal, but they just grew up in fairy. So in this world we have Elfhame, and Elfhame is ruled by the Greenbrier line. And they have this thing called the Blood Crown, which means that the crown can only be passed on to another member of the Greenbrier family. And in order for one of them to be crowned, another member of the family must be the one to put the crown on their head. So for that you need two members of the same family alive in order for one of them to rule. And when we first delve into this world, the current king of Elfhame is nearing his last days as ruler, and he has about 6 children, I think it is, and there is tension to see which of them is going to take over from their father. One of the ones who doesn't really want to rule is Prince Carden, who is the Cruel Prince. He and Jude don't get along, but they somehow find themselves working together to make sure that the right person gets the crown. And basically that is the whole trilogy. It's about seeing who's taking over, who can rule. We learn more about the Blood Crown, about the family. So I really loved how the world was built in the trilogy, especially in the first book. Normally when it comes to high fantasy YA, when I'm thrown into a completely different world, it can sometimes get very confusing, and there's usually a lot of names, a lot of places just thrown at you at once. But this book did a great job of introducing you to the world without just info dumping on you. So I liked how easy it was to fall into the story and what's going on. I also think that the characters were introduced really well, because there is a lot of them, but it introduced them slowly as you go along, which leads me onto the next thing that I really loved about this trilogy, and that is the characters themselves. What's great about this is that no one is truly good in this story. Fairy is a very messed up world. It is as vicious and as horrible as you can expect it to be, especially because we're seeing the story through Jude's eyes. She's a mortal growing up in this world. She's being victim to the fairy's tricks, and because of that we get to see the truly dark sides of this world. And obviously going through that as a human, it has distorted her view of things. She thinks more like a fairy than she does a human, so the decisions that she makes can be quite questionable. Every character in this trilogy makes mistakes. They make decisions that could have been handled better. None of them are truly nice people. They've all got a little bit of a twisted side, and I like that, because with a lot of YA series, the main character is always this perfect hero of a being. I mean, they are usually flawed in some way, but it's not normally an unforgivable way. Whereas in this, characters murder, characters shed blood, characters will fight without hesitation, even if it means hurting people that they love. And I love getting to know those type of characters, just because it's different to what we usually read. And Jude herself is such a refreshing main character because she can be heartless and cold, but it's all part of the package. I also really adored her changing relationship with Carden because they do hate each other, but it changes back and forth throughout the trilogy. There will be moments when they think they can work together and then it changes in an instant and they hate each other again. So it's a really interesting dynamic. There are some fantastic plot twists in this that will make you want to carry on to the next chapter at 2 a.m. I think there are times in each book where things are slower and there can be a bit of a lag in the plot, but it's always picked up by another twist and you're thrown straight back into the chaos. So if you're looking for a series that doesn't move too quickly but still has a lot of action, then this is definitely a great one to pick up. So yeah, I think that's about it that I can say in terms of a spoiler-free review. It's just a really interesting story, and I know that it's probably not everyone's cup of tea, but if you are somebody who likes fairies, if you like a handsome prince with a tail, then definitely give this one a try. It might surprise you. Okay, so for those of you who have read the books, I'm going to delve more into the story, talk about the things that I love. So if you haven't read the books, then please click away from the video. Don't say I didn't warn you if you don't. That's on you, not me. Okay, so not to jump right in at the end, but I'm going to jump right in at the end. I need to talk about how much I absolutely adored the ending of this trilogy. I can't tell you how thrilled I am that we got a happy ending. It was cheesy as hell, but I loved it. The way it ends with them in the mortal world, eating pizza, just having a nice time. I personally loved that. Literally nobody died. Nobody. I mean, Locke died, but we can't say that he didn't have that coming, and he kind of dies off the page. And Grimson dies as well, but again, he had it coming. But in terms of main characters, literally nobody died. Not even Madoc. And for some reason I just really like that about this book, because I expected somebody to die. I always expect somebody to die. So it's more of a shock for everyone to live. And I know that there are quite a lot of people that didn't really like that ending. Every time I finish a book or a series, I'll go on Goodreads and look at other people's reviews, watch people's videos, and I know that this ending had a lot of people torn because they expected more. But personally, for me, I really enjoyed it. I feel like we have this very toxic mindset that everything has to end brutally, that there has to be a huge bloody battle, and that there has to be a lot of death and sacrifice in order for things to be meaningful. And honestly, that's bullshit. I don't like when YA series just kill off a main character purely for shock value. Not when you've spent so long investing yourself into these stories and these characters. I like it when people get out alive and when people get the happy endings they deserve. And with this book, there really isn't any big, huge battle at the end of it. I mean, Codden turns into a serpent and we have to track him down a while. And there's plenty of violent moments, but there's no huge fight. I think a few years ago I probably would have preferred a big battle and a big dramatic ending. But now I'm tired. I've had a terrible year. What I need is to read about Codden experiencing pizza and learning about slushy machines. So yeah, I just had to discuss the ending first and foremost, because that was something that I loved about the trilogy. So I'm kind of just going through the things that I loved about the series. And one of the other points is that there was no love triangle. Not really. I mean, there was that whole thing with Locke and Taryn, but it wasn't that much of a big love triangle deal. And I feel like Jude stayed a bit bitter about that throughout the story, but she wasn't that devastated because she wasn't in love with Locke. So throughout the trilogy, the only main love interest really is Codden, and even then, the romance side of it isn't that big of a deal. The story focuses more on the politics of the world and the characters and their morals and flaws. So the romance was there, but it didn't overwhelm the whole story. And I really love that in a fantasy series. That's how it should be. So the romance that we did get thrown in, I actually enjoyed because it wasn't too in our faces. So delving more into what I was talking about earlier, when none of the characters are really good. I really love the whole situation with Madoc. The fact that he killed the sister's parents and then raised them like his own children was such an interesting part of the story, because they grow up loving him in a twisted sort of way, and despite everything he still loves them as well. And I honestly expected Madoc to turn into more of a villain than what he was. I mean, he was awful in that last book, but there were still aspects of him that was doing this because this is part of who he is and not because he wants to cause harm to these sisters. And at the end of everything, he's still in their lives in some way. The fact that he has to go and live in the mortal world now is absolutely incredible. I need just like a series of short stories following Vivi trying to teach Madoc how to navigate the mortal world, because the idea of that is just hilarious to me. But yeah, I expected him to die in the end. I mean, I'm not really happy that he lived. I would have been fine with it either way, but I do like how Jude was the one to pass sentence on him and decided to be more merciful than he is. I just think that was really an important part of the story, especially because throughout the trilogy she is a really ruthless character, and I feel like Jude in The Cruel Prince would have had him executed, whereas this Jude knows where to show mercy in the situations that she needs to. And I just love seeing her character development in that last book. And also Carden's character development over this trilogy is so incredible. I am a sucker for a character who seems awful, but then you find out little bits of information to tell you that they're not completely that bad. It's predictable, but I still love it anyway. So when we had Nicasia telling Jude about the little things that Carden's done, like helping to free the mortals from Fairy, it completely warmed my heart. I'm just guaranteed to love characters like that. I have a very clear type and Carden is it. So I'm gonna kind of wrap things up there, just because I have a tendency to ramble about pointless things really, rather than the overall story. I could make a 20-minute video entirely on Carden's tale, but no one wants to watch that. So I'm going to end things here, but I'm sure there's lots of things that I forgot to talk about. If there are moments that you want to discuss, then please feel free to drop it in the comments. Tell me all of your thoughts on this trilogy. Did you love it? Did it disappoint you? In terms of things I didn't like, as I said earlier, I do feel like there were parts of the story that lagged. There were a few chapters that were really slow, and I just wanted things to move on. That's really the only thing that I didn't enjoy. I think also I would have liked to have gotten to know certain side characters a bit more, like the Bomb and the Roach. I would have liked to have just seen more casual moments of them with Jude, just because at times it just felt like we were skipping straight to them being great friends. And I'd like to see more of how they got there, if that makes sense. The same could be said for Jude and Carden as well. As much as I love their relationship, I do feel like it skipped ahead quite a bit. They kind of went from just being enemies with benefits to being in love, and I would have loved to have seen more of the process. But again, that probably would have taken focus away from the overall story. And I kind of like that the story didn't focus on the romance. So yeah, it's kind of a difficult one, but maybe a few more things could have been added. But yeah, other than that, I just really enjoyed the trilogy. Maybe I just read it at the right time. I feel like if I'd have read it a couple of years ago, I might not have enjoyed it that much. But over the past year, I've just started getting back into reading after a huge slump. So I feel like a lot of the stuff I'm reading right now, I'm loving because I've spent time away from YA fantasy series. I'm quite easy to please right now, so if you want to recommend me books, drop them down there. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time. Bye!